Another military procurement, this one worth $800 million, goes off the rails. This time, it's for a fleet of standard Army trucks to replace the ones like the one you're seeing in this picture right here, which are supposedly falling apart. Contract bidders were stunned, and they're their words, when National Defense and Public Works abruptly called things off at the 11th hour. And when I mean the 11th hour, I mean with 3 minutes to spare. Some had already spent up to $1 million preparing their bid. What's behind the Department of National Defense and Public Works' sudden change of heart? How is it playing out today? We'll hear from MPs in a minute, but James Cudmore from CBC's got all the details on this. James, let's get this straight. What exactly happened here?
Let's go back to the beginning, 2006. This was the first big summer of the Conservative government's new military agenda, the Canada First Defence Strategy, the plan to re-equip the Canadian forces. The trucks were one of the first announcements in a week of announcements that spanned the country. It included new strategic airlifters, etc. In Valcartier, Quebec, then Defence Minister Gordon O'Connor promised 2,300 new trucks, 1,500 of them to replace those combat trucks. And he said this was an urgent need. He said those combat trucks were broken down, they were rusting out, and they needed to be replaced. And so the military set about the process of buying new ones. And it's interesting that they got part of the job done. They bought some new highway trucks for here in Canada, some of those vehicles. And then it came down to designing and building the new combat trucks and finding someone to build them. And that's where it appears things went off the rails. This RFP, this request for proposal, has been on and off a couple of times. It was finally on again in November of this year, 6 years after the announcement almost by that point. And then just yesterday, just minutes before the bid period was supposed to close, an email from Public Works out to the bidders. It says, economic, marketplace, and budgetary circumstance have changed since the solicitation process began. Therefore, the Government of Canada needs to reassess this procurement to ensure that the right equipment is acquired for the Army at the best value for Canada. Now, folks inside the defense industry are calling this an absolutely stunningly incompetent decision. They say it's ridiculous, and they say that that excuse from the Department of National Defense is simply not true. They said there is no economic issue.
All right, so they're stunned to find out this thing's canceled at the last minute, and the question now is, why did it get canceled? I mean, and this is their one excuse, and who's accountable?
Absolutely, and we know that the government has been trying to do some work on procurement reform, and why not? There have been a lot of problems. We heard just last week Defence Minister Peter MacKay talking about the worst procurement in Canadian history, the Sikorsky helicopters. Under this government's watch, it slipped from 2008 delivery now to not before 2013, and possibly even years longer than that. There are other programs as well off the rails. There are lots of questions to be asked about what the heck is going on inside the Department of National Defence.
All right, let's try to get some answers from some MPs. That's the CBC's James Cudmore, also reporting for CBC Radio on this very issue. Joining me now from Vancouver to get some reaction to that story is Andrew Saxton, the Parliamentary Secretary to the President of the Treasury Board. And in Toronto, Matthew Kellway, the procurement critic for the NDP, and Liberal defence critic John McKay. Let's start with Mr. Saxton. Mr. Saxton, why did Treasury Board, Public Works, D&D, they're all involved in these things, why pull the plug on this procurement up to 3 minutes before the bids? I mean, most of the bidders I've spoke to said the department should have known about this months and months earlier. What happened?
Well, Evan, we have a responsibility to our men and women in uniform in the Canadian Forces to make sure that we provide them with the right equipment. We also have a responsibility to the Canadian taxpayer to make sure we provide that equipment, the right equipment, at the right price. And this particular procurement no longer met that test.
So what happened? Again, the question here is why didn't your Treasury Board is the very mechanism through which this should run through. Shouldn't your department have known months in advance what the price should be?
Well, look, Evan, this shows that the system is in fact working, because the system is designed to prevent procurements that are no longer meeting that test of best value for taxpayer dollars from going ahead. And that's exactly what happened in this case. We prevented that procurement from going ahead because it no longer met that test of best value for Canadian taxpayers.
With all due respect, the system may work, you didn't buy it, but you were supposed to buy these trucks, and clearly something screwed up inside the process, because the departments and the bidders expected. Let me just show you a document. I've obtained a document here. CBC Power and Politics has obtained it. This is a document that is up right now. It's a solicitation of amendment. There's 25 of these things went out. This one went out on July 4th, literally days before. And let me show you what it says here. As of July 4th, you're telling the bidders, don't worry, on July 16th, you could bring your trucks to the Nevada Test Center where you're supposed to test them, and we'll get this worked out. So what changed between July 4th, when you were sending this out, or minutes before, and 2 minutes before the deadline? What changed? Tell me where these costs escalated. What did you discover?
The increase in costs got to the point where it was no longer, in our opinion, value for taxpayer dollars, and that's why we stopped the procurement from going ahead. Having said that, we've already purchased 1,300 trucks off-the-shelf trucks at the proper price, at the right price for Canadian taxpayers. Those already have been delivered. This is only referring to one type of truck, and that's the standard pattern truck.
I have to press you, and then I want to get the opposition in. Projected increases in the dying hours of a contract is very unusual. The bidders are stunned. These are serious companies like Mercedes-Benz, Oshkosh. These are big companies. They do this all the time. They do work here in Canada. Can you give us an idea of who is accountable for finding out the cost and what caused the cost increase?
Well, like I said, Evan, we've put a halt to this particular procurement, and we're going to take another look at it, and we're going to make sure that we get the right equipment at the right price. We no longer felt that this equipment was the right price because of the cost increases that had taken place.
But again, I would like to go to Matthew Kellway and John McKay, but we're having audio issues for them, folks. They can't seem to hear us, so I'm going to stick with Mr. Saxon for a second before I bring in the opposition. But Mr. Saxon, what were the cost increases? The price of metal didn't go up. Was it the bidders that increased? They say no. That means it must be someone either in Treasury Board, Public Works, or D&D, one department that didn't have a handle on their costs. And we're trying to get a handle. Remember, the Sikorsky procurement has been a mess. You've had the cancellation of the other military vehicles because ostensibly they didn't meet their requirements. You've had that's the close combat vehicles, of course. That was put off until September. What cost escalated here? Can you give us some details?
I cannot give you the details because I don't have the details, but I can tell you that the price has gotten to the point where it is no longer, in our opinion, the best price for the Canadian taxpayer.
But why don't you have the details? You're Treasury Board. But if you're Treasury Board, why don't you have the details of what caused the contract to be pulled? I mean, it seems to me that's the critical detail. Why don't you have that?
The critical detail, Evan, is that the price got beyond the price which we thought was fair to Canadian taxpayers.
And that's why we stopped. But you're supposed to book the money, and Treasury Board's supposed to book that money early. My question is, why didn't you know what caused the escalation in price? Why didn't you foresee that months ago?
You can ask that to the bidders as to what caused the escalation in price.
Are you suggesting it was the bidders? They're suggesting that they met the criteria. And you're saying that's something that the bidders gave 3 minutes before the deadline. All four of them escalated the price. Is that what you're telling me?
No, I'm suggesting that you ask the bidders what caused the increase in price. That's what I'm suggesting.
And I'm telling you that I have asked some of the bidders what caused the escalation, and they say they don't know. They're saying nothing from their end did. They suggest it must have been department not getting their costs right. So I've asked them, to be fair. I can't get an answer. They don't know the answer.
Well, Evan, as you know, as a government, it's our responsibility not just to provide the right equipment, but to also provide the right equipment at the right price for the Canadian taxpayer. And that's what we're doing here, and that's exactly what's happened. We've had very successful procurements with the Hercules aircraft. We've just had 17 delivered on time, on budget. We've also had other vehicles delivered. As I mentioned, 1,300 trucks off the shelf were delivered on time. We had a very successful shipbuilding procurement strategy, which is delivering $33 billion worth of ships to the Royal Canadian Navy. So we've had some very successful procurements, and we want to make sure that that success continues, and that's why we've stopped this procurement at this stage.
How do you and Treasury Board know the price? You can't know the price of those vehicles until you open the envelopes, which happens after the RFP has gone through, but you stop the process. So I guess my question is, how do you know the price before you've actually had the competition?
We have professionals, Evan, that evaluate the costs, evaluate what the prices should be, and they advised that the price was beyond what it should be, and that's why we put a halt to this procurement process.
All right, Mr. Saxon, you've been very patient with me. Usually I would invite the opposition in. I wanted to show us, John McKay is standing by, and so is Mr. Kellway, Matthew Kellway. They can't hear us. We're having audio issues. I'm going to take a short break. Please be patient, Mr. Saxton. I know you already have. We'll take a short break. We'll come back with this. We'll see if we can repair the audio. Thanks so much. Power Politics will be back in 1 minute. We'll try to repair some of this audio issue. Welcome back to Power and Politics. We're talking about the cancellation of an $800 million bid for new trucks for the Canadian military. Why did the government cancel the bid process 3 minutes before the deadline, as 4 bidders who had spent almost $1 million each waiting for this contract to come? Why did it get canceled? We've been talking to Andrew Saxton in Vancouver, the Secretary of the President of the Treasury Board. He's been very patient there because the opposition is having audio issues in Toronto. The NDP military procurement critic Matthew Kellway and Liberal defense critic John McKay. Mr. Kellway still can't hear us, but John McKay can. So I'm going to do a real quick relay here. Mr. McKay, your reaction to why this was canceled, and then maybe Mr. Kellway can be prompted to also give his reaction.
Well, my reaction to the cancellation is there's one more chapter in the decade of doofus. These trucks were quite urgent in 2006. Surely to goodness, in the last 6 years, we've been able to get this contract right. It's a simple contract, it's not complicated, but there's all kinds of photo ops, and there's announcements, and then there's re-announcements, and there's more photo ops, but everything but getting the job done. It's a huge disappointment to the military. It's a huge disappointment to those who are bidding on the contract. It's a huge disappointment to those men and women who are anticipating jobs out of this contract. And if this is the way that the Conservatives run the military, then Lord help us all. This is a complete mess from A to Z and back again. And cancel on people 3 minutes before the deadline is due is
now they say the price has gone too high. I want to get. Can you ask Mr. Kellway just his response then to what's happened here?
Yeah, Matthew, they want to know your responses as well. But let me just say before that, well, you tried to get out of Andrew what the price was that's gone too high. It hasn't, and you tried to get it out of the contractors, and it hasn't. So here's your reaction.
My reaction, well, Evan, my reaction, without the benefit of hearing what Andrew had to say and James before him, it's the usual reaction to these because we're talking about missteps in military procurement all the time. It's here we go again. I'm not sure why this government can't get a handle on on this issue, but they seem to be doing military procurement on the back of a napkin all the time. This isn't rocket science. This is about good public administration. That's all. These are technical issues, these are bureaucratic issues, these are administrative issues that need to be sorted out and managed so that military procurement can work in this country. And I heard Minister McKay blaming the Liberals the other day for the cyclone debacle. But these guys have had 6.5 years in government to figure this one out, and they still are unable to manage this portfolio properly. And what is particularly disturbing about this one are really two things.
Right.
One, these are trucks. This isn't the most complicated military hardware that we're talking about here. This is about procuring military trucks. And the second thing is that this is an outright cancellation. And we know there was a DND report in 2004, 8 years ago, warning of the likely eventuality of some catastrophic incident, either a death or serious injury to a member of our Canadian forces. And yet there seems to be no response about that issue now. And we had Minister O'Connor say that this was an urgent matter. And yet they haven't done anything about it. And we have nothing but silence from Minister McKay on what they're going to do to protect
Just
Canadian
to be fair
forces.
here, I know Mr. Kellway can't hear me, so it's difficult for me to not, I know we had a bit of a soliloquy there, and I appreciate that. Let me just get some, but we're trying to handle, to be fair here, to get all sides here. I just want to put some response back to Mr. Saxton. Just tell me how this works here, and you're listening to the opposition, Andrew Saxton. If there's a problem with expenditures, D&D, the process is the Department of National Defense, which, by the way, Minister Fantino was supposed to be in charge of this procurement, but they're supposed to basically decide to make money available, and they've got to go to your department, Treasury Board. So here's my question. When did Treasury Board find out that there were new expenses that were too high for the money booked for this? and what drove those expenses up? What was the factor? Tell us, be transparent about what happened there.
Evan, what's really important to note is that the decision not to go ahead, not to proceed, was made before the commitment was made. Now, it's very hypocritical for John McKay of the Liberals to criticize us for stopping our procurement before it goes ahead, when they actually canceled procurements after they signed on the dotted line, after the government had committed, to the tune of $500 million in penalties was charged to the Canadian government because the Liberals canceled the helicopter contract back in the 1990s.
Well?
So I think it's very ironic and hypocritical that John McKay of the Liberals is criticizing us when so much money was thrown away by the Liberal government.
But are you saying? I
can tell you that we're saving money for the Canadian taxpayer. That's the whole reason why this procurement has not gone ahead.
But you're saving money, but you still don't have trucks. So the problem here is something screwed up. The trucks aren't getting delivered, so of course you're saving money. But are you defending that the process worked when 3 minutes before something, when you're telling 4 significant bidders you're going to make a decision, you still don't know what drove the costs up? Is that what I'm hearing?
What you're hearing is our responsibility, first and foremost, is to the Canadian taxpayer and to represent them and to protect their money. And that's what we did in this case, and that's what we'll continue to do.
All right. I appreciate everyone's patience with the audio. Matthew Kellway, John McKay. I wanted to bring you in earlier. We couldn't hear you. Your patience duly noted. And Mr. Saxton, that puts you on a little more than usual. But I appreciate all 3 of you coming on this one. Thanks, gentlemen.
Okay, Evan, you're welcome. Have a good day.
Thanks, Evan.
We want to hear